going to talk to you about the government control of DNA. So just to start with a little story, imagine that you're a new parent of a baby, a 1-month-old daughter, and you're just taking her in for her normal checkup, and the doctor tells you that she has a very high chance of developing cystic fibrosis due to the presence of the genes for that disease. This was determined by the testing of her DNA samples that you didn't know the government actually had. How would you guys feel about that? How many of you would be okay with that if the government took a sample of your child's DNA without you knowing? So it's kind of funny that the government has that access. Well, in Florida, every baby that's born, the government automatically takes a DNA sample and puts it into a DNA bank. And a DNA bank, can you tell us a little more about that?
It's like a sperm bank or a tissue bank. DNA is extracted from certain patients' tissues and frozen and stored indefinitely. So the DNA is available for future testing at any time and for any reason. They're located throughout the country, and there are various ones that exist for different reasons.
So we're going to present both sides of it, not really a debate, but rather just give you the information and you can form your own opinion. So some of the reasons that there should be DNA banks throughout the country and why we should promote this is they're very beneficial to scientific research. With the access to different DNA, it's very easy to test for different diseases, or helps us, we said, mainly to cures or new medicines. With the access to these samples, you're able to test for different things, different control groups. And for military purposes, this is one that we thought was pretty interesting. Each military, I guess every soldier that goes into the military, they take a DNA sample, and it's mostly used for identifying bodies that come back that they're unsure of. It helps determine diseases at an early state. Like we told you with the baby, it can tell you whether there's a presence for that gene. And in the baby's case, it didn't end up developing cystic fibrosis, but it can be there as a warning sign, and you can start treating it earlier. And it aids in law enforcement, which we'll discuss later, can help in the crimes.
While there are positive effects of DNA databases, there are also negative effects. The first one is an invasion of privacy. The child, of course, didn't have a choice in having its DNA taken. And throughout other DNA databases, many people don't have the choice in having it taken as well. Discrimination is a very large controversy surrounding this. Employers often desire taking these DNA samples in order to test for the traits that somebody could carry that would produce certain illnesses in the future. And they can, based on that, they can decide if they would like to hire you, or they could even fire you based on that. And that's genetic discrimination. Like Mackenzie was saying about the child, although cystic fibrosis didn't form, if in the future employers knew that the child had that trait, she may be less likely to get hired for something. It also affects employees who sustain injuries on the job from receiving compensation. There was a case in 1999 at the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory. They conducted pre-employment DNA testing for certain traits like sickle cell and non-genetic screenings for pregnancy and sexually transmitted diseases. It was found that the workers were in the right and the employees were in the wrong, or the employers were in the wrong. And there was also another case in 2002 at the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway Corporation. Employers were charged with testing for hereditary neuropathy with liability to pressure palsies, which causes carpal tunnel syndrome. They wanted to see if the employees who claimed this disease had traits that would eventually lead to it, or if it strictly came from their work being done. And they were, the employees were also sided, or employees were also sided with in this case. And so there was a settlement. The company had to pay $2.2 million to reimburse them for this. It is unethical. This also relates to the privacy matter. It goes against someone's personal belief possibly, or rather they didn't want the government or other people getting a hold of their genetic material and data and using it as they please.
So basically our major issues of this topic are the ethics and whether or not we should, if that's an ethic violation or people will have a problem with that. discrimination in the workplace or use of DNA in the workplace for the employer, and crime rate, which we will get to in a minute. Okay. Ethics, my side is that it doesn't really go against ethical beliefs, and it's truly no different or more private than fingerprints or photographs, which some can debate, but I read a couple different articles and it's saying it's part of your genetic makeup, and as your fingerprints, it's your own, it's like your identity. Only you have that set of fingerprints, so it's just another way to identify yourself and your genetic makeup. And with access to this, it truly is no different than just an access to your fingerprint, and there's a lot of different things that it can benefit from.
For my side, it does violate privacy because unlike fingerprints and photographs, it contains multiple data analysis of what's within your body. And just the knowledge of knowing if you can contract a certain disease, if you carry that trait, can prohibit jobs and a lot of the time insurance companies. They would like to test for pre-existing conditions because they don't want to spend an enormous amount of money on something that they will know about previously. So they wouldn't want to insure those people who have that chance. So with that knowledge, it does hurt them.
Okay, so DNA control in the workplace. My side is that DNA control in the workplace aids employers in selecting reliable employees. This basically just allows the employer, although some may view this as discrimination, it allows them to find someone, it like tests their longevity of life and someone that's going to be reliable for them as a worker. So say it's a long-term position and it requires like a very stressful position, they can test and see if that person can handle stress well, or if they maybe have a mental or a gene that could lead to like a mental disorder longer down the road. And the results of these tests can encourage current employees to be healthier because they know that there's a risk that if they have different problems or something, they could be either demoted or like put on probation kind of from their employer.
Once again, it can prevent someone from being hired or from keeping their jobs due to genetic illnesses. Even if somebody has the trait and the possibility of getting sick, it doesn't directly mean that they will, just like the baby that Mackenzie talked about before. And even people who do have a chance of developing cancer or sickle cell trait or Huntington's disease, they still deserve that opportunity to have a job and work because, I mean, that's how you get by in life. Just because you have a disease or the possibility of inheriting a disease, that doesn't mean you don't deserve to work. And that's a big problem.
We were posed with the question if we think employers should be allowed to have DNA control or the different circumstances in which it would be an okay thing for employers to do. And we both discussed like the terminal illnesses, although that shouldn't be a reason whether or not you should be hired. Employees do look into that. And also transferable diseases. If you're going to be working in like the medical field or if you're a doctor or something and you're in a hospital, you could easily transfer a disease or something to one of your patients. That could be looked into as something with whether or not you would be hired. Also, things like pilots, police officers, anyone dealing with someone that would be taking risk for another person, like you're being responsible for their safety. How many of you are familiar with the JetBlue story from over the summer with Pilot Osborne? Anyone? Anyone else? Okay, well, a pilot for JetBlue, which is a national airline, was ready to fly. They started the flight, and a little bit into the flight, he had like a psychotic meltdown, basically, an episode. And they were really concerned that he was going to like take the plane down. Well, the co-pilot, which this is kind of funny, but it's a personal, like our family friend, lives in Salem, which is about 20 minutes away, Jason Dowd. He took over the plane and they kind of took Captain Osborne out of the pilot box. And if they would have tested before, they might have found that he could have had a case like the psychotic episode. They could have predicted that would happen. Well, with this on the plane, it put all the passengers at risk. So this would be an example of where it would be something good to do to make sure all like the passengers were safe before the flight.
We both agreed that there are certain jobs and circumstances where it would be best that if they have testing, because there are other lives in danger along with that.
Okay, for crimes in DNA, there's many different sides to this, but just basically, those who are innocent should not be concerned with the testing of their DNA samples. Law enforcement believes that if you're an innocent party, then you shouldn't be upset if they have your sample on, like they have it in the bank or in the storage. If you really have nothing to worry about, then they can just use your DNA for the benefit of fighting other crimes. It also allows the government to track and find criminals very easily. If they have current criminals, like already convicted criminals, their DNA on file, and say they're released from jail later on down the road and they commit another crime, well, they already had their DNA, so they could figure out whether or not that was the same person committing the same crime, and it may prevent crimes.
On the other hand, there are people who have been wrongfully convicted and they served time for a very long time until they are proven innocent. Their DNA is entered into that database, and they are alongside like very serious criminals who have been proven guilty and who aren't innocent, and they truly are innocent. So that's kind of with them for life. They're sanctioned in that grouping. And also with people who commit very not innocent crimes, but smaller crimes that aren't as abrasive. Their DNA is also submitted alongside very serious criminals as well. And this actually has a racial impact because the majority of people that are convicted, prosecuted, and locked away are African Americans and Hispanics, and this is often wrongly as well. So there's a higher rate of them than Caucasians. So this ultimately impacts racial minorities, and this also relates to a study that concluded 17% of African American population is related to someone in the DNA database of criminals, which is extremely high compared to the 4% of the Caucasian population. This means that an African American person has a greater chance to be subject to criminal investigation due to these numbers. Especially someone that's related to them as well, they can be brought into that and examined, even if they're innocent, all by DNA.
The supplement to that would be for the DNA controlling crimes, is that you can take random samples from just people, like each city or community would just take random samples from their citizens. It would be regardless of race. Like she said, it's typically African American, Hispanics. They would do it from all different types of race, and they would have it on file. So it would be less discrimination, would be their argument to that claim. We also looked into health insurance with the DNA control. For the pros of this, it allows insurance companies to promote healthier lifestyles. If you're concerned about being, like, your insurance company providing for you or covering you, you kind of take action to be more healthy, and you can look into further treatment. This isn't saying that they won't cover you if you do have a disease or you have risk for a disease, but you need to take the adequate preventions.
While this is true in many insurance companies, as I said before, do test for pre-existing conditions. That's a health problem that exists before the application of a new health provider or a new plan. And it prevents those with pre-existing conditions from receiving benefits. And while Mackenzie did say it can promote being healthy, you can't really promote or try to be healthy when there's something within you that's constant, or not constantly, but that has the potential to negatively harm you. And there was actually a case with a boy who it was detected that Fragile X syndrome, which is a form of mental retardation, was found when they DNA tested him, and he was dropped from their insurance plan. So that ultimately harms him because he can't get the care that he needs. And many people don't have the money to afford these extravagant health plans to stay and get what they need. So they're dropped and often go without insurance and without the benefits that would help them.
We were posed with the question, if we were doctors and we were talking to employers of the insurance company, what decision would we tell them to make regarding DNA control? We both decided that although you can have the DNA control and the DNA testing, that shouldn't prevent you from covering them. As a doctor, it would be our duty to find the best interest of the patient, which would be making sure they are covered from their illnesses. Just because they have a current or pre-existing condition, or they have the potential to develop a condition, doesn't mean they shouldn't be covered. as doctors, we look to promote the healthiest lifestyle and the best way to treat or prevent a disease from forming.
It's in our duty to protect those that are ill, and if we were to advise the health insurers to not cover them due to the trait of, I think it was cystic fibrosis, that would go against what we believe in and what we stand for, because we are meant to help those that we can in every possible way that we can.
And for those of you who don't know, cystic fibrosis is a disorder involving the lungs, but not only does it affect the lungs, it can affect other parts of your body. So it's a long-term illness, and if we were to advise them not to help, that patient potentially could develop risk later on down the road that could affect their longevity, and different conditions could develop. We're also posed with whether or not this is a matter of law, if it should be in law enforced, if it should just be something that the employer and people and insurance companies should be able to debate amongst themselves, or if it should be negotiated between the different discrepancies. We decided that it should be a law because there could be many discrepancies between, say I'm an insurance company and she would be who I was providing for. Well, we could come up with a plan, but many other insurance companies would do something different. Well, then as a patient, she could come back at me and say, well, this insurance company, so if we made this a law and set a new law into place, there would no longer be discrepancies, and there would be no questions about what was right and what was wrong, and whether or not DNA control would be used. So they would have to sit down and form a plan as to whether or not it would be implicated as a positive thing. It would help many people. If it varied by state or by local places, more people would have issues relating to that, and it would just cause probably multiple court cases, and many of those court cases don't even get seen or tried. So it would lead to more problems. If it was a matter of law and it had set regulations, it would run more smoothly, and people would probably get more care that they needed. So overall, the control of DNA has both positives and negatives, and as you form your own opinion about this, just remember that although there are some things, the control of DNA is beneficial to things like the crime rate or helping employees in the workforce, but like she said, it can also,
there are negative impacts. Insurers can drop you for pre-existing conditions, and there's a lot of discrimination and racial problems that are belonging to this as well.
And there are